Greetings, greetings. Sending you all some warm, positive vibrations. Uh, Today, I just wanted to just touch base and communicate about something that could potentially be very helpful in having folks avoid the need or the urge or the drive to enter into cults. And as many of us can see now, there are some distinct patterns which, fortunately and unfortunately, have come to the surface. By now, we should know that cults are rampant globally, and they are definitely very present and active within the Afro community. And so, in the effort of understanding, perhaps um, seeking to understand can help us get to the root of the problem and then come up with some effective solutions, right? Solutions being um, why do folks, for example, feel the need to go into a cult in the first place? So if folks didn't have some certain issues going on, there wouldn't be as much of a draw. People perhaps would not be as vulnerable to enter into cults. So there's been a lot that has come to the surface. As I stated before, this is not an entertainment channel. This is not a channel where I ask for people's permission, their validation. I'm not interested in having my emotions or my expressions policed. Anything that is expressed here, if it doesn't resonate, we have the choice to, click off. However, if you find something that is valuable, or that stimulates critical thinking, that helps you or the young people, young adults, or even mature adults establish a vetting process, right? A vetting process of critical thinking and a litmus test, um, and some healthy boundaries before we let people into our psyche, um, into our underwear, before we give people our bank accounts, before we get into situations where we're isolated, then that would be a very positive use of this channel. So the content that is up here is for folks. There's a whole extensive list of cults, black, white, and in between, so that folks, as they research, can start to see there are some very distinct patterns, and there are some things that actually leave us wide open to cults. There are patterns that come up for all human beings, and there's some very distinct patterns that we should be able to see by now. If we press pause on prioritizing entertainment and looking from outside, like that's those people over there, we could perhaps consider that being that this behavior and these patterns are so widespread, you never know where it could be you, or if a close family member or someone close in your community could be experiencing a cult. We may not consider indirectly how we are also affected. When this kind of behavior, manipulation and control, manipulation of young people and their minds, manipulation of mothers and women, how we are all affected. And this is definitely an opportunity for us to grow up and mature. And I would even say not to be so gullible as a people, not to be so gullible as a species and so easily manipulated, because we are so open and thirsty for human interaction. We're so open and vulnerable due to societal and familial trauma. We are so open, perhaps not having certain life skills or communication tools. We are open and ripe. We've actually, many of us, if not most of us, have been groomed for cults through religion. That's not to say there aren't some elemental truths in all religions, but these are patterns that can be distinctly discerned on a worldwide scale, that human beings are manipulated. One of the main ways we're manipulated is through fear, which is a lot of times is inculcated or is injected through religion, right? And then in other ways in society. But what I wanted to touch on today is something that a pattern that may be going on with many of the members of cults, right? And one of the ways that many people are manipulated in cults is one is usually one of the fears, and one of them fears can play out in different ways. And one of the manifestation of fears and insecurities is shame, right? Shame could be for something that someone has done or something that has been done to them. Now, many people on behind the screens, or it's almost like they're shouting at a movie screen through the computer or the internet and watching with their snacks. And some people are laughing, are very entertained. But these are really people's lives. And if people look close, many people might perhaps notice that a lot of these patterns of cults could be played out in your own personal life. Manipulation, um, it could be in a church. The difference with a church is you can get up and you can go home. With a distinction in the cult, quite often the person is isolated. But many of us may not realize, for example, that we've been groomed, right? In terms of for in religion for cults, for example, not questioning the Most High, the how um, the discouragement from critical thinking. We're not encouraged to think critically. I know when I was raised up in my family was raised in the church. We were told as children not to question, things, not to question adults, not to question the Most High, not to question our respective religions. So many of these things set us up, right? Set us up when that is indoctrinated over and over, when it has been become meshed in our culture. We've um, we've been groomed not to question authority figures, even if the authority figures are invisible, or when adults cannot answer questions. Sometimes they become very frustrated or can lash out to children if they're frustrated and can't answer questions. So there are many ways actually that we have been groomed and ripe and ready for cults, not questioning authority, things that just don't make sense, rationalizations and justifications for things that don't make any sense. Now, we do get there all kinds of people around the world and our cultures and religions, which all get meshed together. We're giving stories to pass down tradition, to pass down culture, and also a way to pass on lessons, right? And morals. But it is obvious that a lot of that has been co-opted. There have been many different versions and edits on all the different various religious books, and it's interesting that people, not limited to the Afro community, spend so much time debating which person or character that none of us can really vouch for because we weren't there. If these characters are mythical, if they really existed, whose account of what happened. If we really were to think about it on a basic level, it doesn't even make sense. So we spend a lot of time and ego trying to defend stories, and it can siphon us off and distract us from seeing what is exactly in front of us because we are holding on so dogmatically to a construct or something that now holds all this symbolic value for us, and it can really distract us from using our common sense. So if we would look honestly, many of us have been groomed for cults from from the womb. For example, not attacking anybody's religion, but let's say, like, the thought or the parable or the story of a popular religious icon walking on water. So we know in our 3D reality, I have yet to experience someone walking on water. And so one of the things that I've noticed a pattern with cults is when you don't agree with something or a tenet of the cult, you are publicly shamed. So shame is a huge tool in controlling people. Fear, and one of the manifestations of fear is shame. So one thing in particular I wanted to touch on today is, and this is a big thing that many people, that leaves people wide open to cults, and that cult leaders know, and they will play it to the hilt, is that people may have been violated sexually, or um, could have been introduced to sexual behaviors at an early age that you don't really know how to put it into order as a child or a young adult. I think today we may take for granted, and maybe we have, as a collective, have arrested development, right? Or we're underdeveloped, right, in this area because these conversations aren't had. And as a collective, it hasn't been prioritized that we deal or that we deal with all of the sexual trauma coming at us from so many different angles from society. We have slavery, but even also how um, sexual violation is rampant within our own community. So there are many things that we're not talking about. And so the thing I want to touch on today is harm, right? And it's something I came across. I found a really excellent resource online. I think it's important for us to um, investigate and educate ourselves on these things so we can have more effective conversations, right? So a lot of times we can resort to name calling, pointing fingers, and a lot of times this stuff gets us so emotionally um, explosive that we never get to articulating and identifying the root a lot of these behaviors. So some of the research I was coming across today was on how do we assist people that have caused harm. So I was like, wow, this is really interesting. This is, down the rabbit hole of research. I think it's really interesting. So it's easy to take the position that we just throw people in the garbage can, right? But these are human beings, especially when they've done something that's really horrific. You have conversations around the death penalty. And this may seem like a really extreme example, but again, the concept of shame and also harm and also accountability. These are huge things, right? Nobody comes out of the womb wanting to harm somebody or do something that's horrific. Nobody comes out of the womb wanting these kinds of violations and sexual violations to happen to us. I think many people, in terms of the entertainment industry and young artists, I think they can be very underdeveloped and immature in thinking of the long-reaching effects of the lyrics and the music. And as a collective, we haven't, as a species and definitely as a culture and as a collective, we haven't wanted to really address the accountability of the harm that a lot of our behaviors cause and to really look at the root because we perceive we may have to give up something, right? We may have to do something different. So again, with everybody looking on the screen, we may not even consider collectively in in silence, or even looking around at the young people and what's going on around us, how we may be collectively complicit in not at least having constructive, respectful conversations around healthy boundaries. And when we do have somebody in our community cause harm, what do we do with that? I think sometimes we can become very mob like and not consider that these are still human beings. Now, it doesn't mean that folks are not accountable, right? But I don't think we're having real conversations about the roots of a lot of these behaviors, and we have a tendency um, to dehumanize people, and sometimes just not realizing we may not even know what to do. So even if we don't know all the answers, for us, I mean, I suppose it's for all of us to think: do we have a vested interest Um, and seeing something different, right? And so even if we open our mind, it's like, what does something different look like? Like, let's say, for example, can we imagine a community where children are respected, right? They're respected, and in that, I mean, there are healthy boundaries around them, and them not being hypersexualized or exposed to certain kinds of behaviors inappropriately. Like, what can we imagine even what that would look like? Can we imagine a community? And this is without, I want to be really clear, without the need for a religion, or without the need for a guru, without the need for a religious text, because we are human beings and we have on board innate common sense. But trauma can skew that. And there are entities, there are individuals and predators, there are folks that have a very clear understanding of the human psyche. And through inflicting trauma, you can totally change somebody's trajectory, right? Through over sexualizing or introducing small children to certain kinds of behavior at a young age, you can totally skew their view for the rest of their lives. So these are conversations that have not been prioritized. I think or would appear, and I don't have all the answers. Anything I say is not law, just one woman's perspective, and just making an effort to critically think. Leave a lot of these discussions over to the government or to the school system. And so perhaps we get whatever we get because we're not open, or we don't make ourselves vulnerable to have the respectful communications, or maybe from so fearful, have been so indoctrinated with fear, we feel that we can't have these conversations without religion or without folks with a vested interest, like a conflict of interest, to medicate everything, right? So the accountability, what do we do? What do we do with folks that cause harm? And so you can look this video up on your own. There's a video and a whole series. It brought up a whole chain of videos. I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but there's one video you can find on YouTube called "How to Support Harm Doers and Being Accountable." And I was like, wow, that is really interesting. So just that one video right there's a list of them that are really interesting, right? How to support harm doers and being accountable. I think for many of us, our first inclination would be, slap them down, lock them up, shut them off from society. And that may have a place. That might be an option, but in order for us to think differently, right? If we leave everything to the prison system, right, to folks that are impersonal, into the business of the prison industrial complex, as we can see, we're just going to get more prisons. And if all of the citizens and community members, if we constantly leave everything over to a quote unquote, to a elder or somebody in a so-called position, we're not contributing anything to the conversation. So what I've definitely seen, if you leave everything to someone else and you don't feel like you have a valuable perspective, then you're going to get what you get. I even noticed that within a cult. If you take your life and you put it into someone else's hands, who you have not even vetted properly, but because they speak with enough confidence, you're going to get whatever you get. And you may perhaps not be privy or be able to cross-reference this person's character or this organization's character or their track record. And there's something, again, I think it comes from religion, with just not trusting ourselves to make decisions. My experience as a collective, these are things sometimes we're being told as a average citizen. The medical doctor is more of an expert on your body than you. So it's like we've been really indoctrinated out of a confidence and out of using our onboard common sense. But back to this subject, how to support harm doers and being accountable. I think that is really something to explore, right? And I'm going to list a couple of other videos here. Again, I think these are communication skills and problem solving, and just things that we're just not. I don't know that we have anything think tanks that are covering these things. And so this is what leaves many people wide open to cults, with the amount of abuse, drugs, alcohol, perversion that we are exposed to without any way to process, this stuff. So another video, what are obstacles to accountability, right? What does justice look like for survivors, right? What is accountability? And we might think this stuff is cut and dry, but again, for us to have mature conversations that are not so loaded emotional, because these things are very emotional, especially if we take a look at the amount of sexual violation and violence and crime that we expose to on a daily basis, to we've become desensitized to it. It has become normal. This is normal now in a lot of the melodramas and the TV programming. So this all has become normalized behavior. So it becomes normal to children. And if we even look at it, a lot of this behavior has become normalized even in a lot of religious, centers. So at what point do we, in our quiet moments, reclaim our common sense, our humanity, and at the same time create healthy boundaries, right? And have conversations around establishing standards for consequences for scamming, consequences for sexual violation, um, legal, financial, and in some cases, physical consequences in terms of defending yourself. How do we get to the root of all the violation that's going on? There are many things that people are doing for money. You know, I've heard in many of the comments on folks, some of these folks in and out of cults. Just the other day, someone, where their parents at? Where their parents at? Which is a great example because, as we all know, there are many people that are growing up without parents, let alone one parent. There are folks that are growing. Yes, we have people growing up without parents, without guidance. We have some folks that are growing up with parents who are not emotionally present and who may not themselves have certain life skills or communication skills. You know, many of us may not be prioritizing personal development. So these are things that can get um, collapsed into a cult, right? Where you may need life skills, right? But we get that misconstrued with religion, or we need somebody. You know, we're looking for answers and some things that are very practical. And a lot of the stuff has not been present. So these are things that leave us wide open to cults. And if you perhaps, or someone feels that I came up with all this religion, and the religion didn't give me these skills, and I've tried all these other things that have that didn't work. And this is what I heard someone say: a very mature, in terms of age, an educated adult say this in the cult that I had an experience with. I tried all this stuff out there and it didn't work. So this was someone that had invested a lot in personal and professional development courses, had several degrees, but still emotionally was going through a lot of trauma from failed relationships, right? This left them wide open to cults, right? These things that are not being dealt with. So many people's, it seems their only option would be a church or confession or medication or a therapist, right? So I think perhaps I don't have all the answers, but it's going to require us to think deeper and to really trust our common sense and make the effort to invest in ourselves, to invest in education. So there's a lot of mishmash on the internet, but there's also a lot of education. So it's up to us to apply a vetting process and a filter for the information we get, because we're very easily manipulated. I can tell you, as a woman that I'm by no means a dummy, and I've degrees that seem to have a lot of sense, and at the same time, that primal part of our brain that has been traumatized is not logical. So sometimes we're yelling at the screen as if a lot of this emotional trauma that people are dealing with is logical. And that's just not how the human psyche works. So predators invest in understanding the human psyche, just like folks trying to market trash and junk food and poisonous substances to us. It's a similar principle. But this conversation, supporting those who have done harm. And I'm sure we can all think of several overt examples. But again, I think, and I was saying to my sister, I think that a lot of this stuff has come to the surface. Maybe perhaps if we take a step back and look at it from a quote unquote spiritual perspective, or if not even spiritual, a grander perspective. As a collective, there are some big lessons. There's some huge lessons that we can take away from this, right? We can become distracted and making everything about quote unquote white supremacy, and that has its relevancy. But do we really want a substitute or any form of supremacy or any form of narcissist in any color or shape or any culture? Do we want to keep replacing one for another? Do we want to keep replacing one master for another master teacher for another? Because what is consistent is a lack of trust in our common sense, a lack of self-discipline, a lack of taking a stand and standing up for things that we see is off within our community, because it's going to require us perhaps to do some work and to let go of some things and to make ourselves vulnerable and accountable as a collective. So I'm not going to stay in here long. Hopefully this can stimulate some critical thinking, because I don't think there can be any lack of critical thinking. I feel a lot of compassion for the parents of grown adults in cults. Sometimes I want to think like, go get your daughter, go get your, but it's not, it's not up to me. However, when people can come and they can share, hopefully um, we can come away with some lessons, right? Because this is a time when many cults are scooping people up in this time of fright and fear of quote unquote COVID. This is a time of fright and fear. And the older, savvier cult leaders, they know how to go underground, they know how to morph and transform, they take notes from each other. And it's not limited to one or two or three cults. This mentality of cults, the mentality of groupthink, is widespread. And many people may think that you're invincible to it, but it's not. There's a lot of information that many of these cult leaders are privy to, and I keep hearing this term: the knowledge, the knowledge, the knowledge. No one owns knowledge. There's some people become privy to it and manipulate it, and can easily manipulate it. I can say as one of their many women, we're very gullible, and it's even a term I came across. I can't think of what the term is, but there's a term for women that are very aroused and attracted to men of intelligence or knowledge. And so the interesting thing is, I think that applies also to men as well, even though they may not be sexually attracted. Well, we're just it's bigger than putting somebody up on a pedestal, but a way of manipulation. But I can definitely tell you when we get open on gift of gab. And so while it may not be these current popular cult leaders, that could be your particular minister or your imam. There are patterns. There are patterns. We step back and depersonalize, because they come in a package and they speak eloquently, or they speak trigger words that trigger you. This is actually an art, and it's a science, and it has been used since time immemorial to manipulate people. And I think 2021 is definitely a time, like it's long overdue for folks to be very, very discerning, and to enact a vetting process and apply it to everyone, black, white, and in between. This is not a time to listen to people's sweet words and continue to allow everyone into your psyche because you get riled up and they show you something you want to see, and they say some words you like, or they have some hair or outfit you like, or they have a nice body. It's not worth it. But no matter how much information is there, there will be some people that think, well, this life must be better than what I was doing out there. So it becomes this lesser of the evils, which I think is very dangerous. And many people have zero idea, don't have a clue of what they're getting themselves into. So I'm going to cut this short. Again, these are some videos that are available about harm and accountability. And I invite people perhaps to pause and to keep an open mind on what is being said. Because I think ultimately the amount of trauma, there's so much to be said for the trauma that's being injected into people, that goes into people's subconscious, is a way that you make people ripe open for fear and for manipulation, where people are looking desperately for some kind of relief. And that relief can come in some forms, in a cult, or some forms that are really dangerous. So that being said, hope folks keep their critical thinking caps on and pay attention, and just be mindful that these are people's real lives that are out here, right? And many people may think that it couldn't happen to you, but sometimes it's happening on a grander scale, or it may be happening in the way that's more palatable to you. Right? If you're living inside the city where a lot of the amenities and the things that you're paying for has been built into a system. So you may not notice, some of what's going on to be like a cult. It's more of like a group think and it's socially acceptable. Inside of these smaller cults, it's more isolated, but it is no joke. Also interesting, someone had pointed out that Tyler Perry had put out a little mini series on cults. I believe it's called Ruth. And it's very interesting. Like, I looked in the comments and some people thought it was off. So, some people may think the acting wasn't that great, but I investigated. A lot of it was on point to give people an example of what is going on. And also, if you should look through the playlist on this channel and pick and choose black cults, white cults, and everything in between. There are some distinct, consistent patterns, and the shortcut to shortening your learning curve is to see the patterns. If you observe different cults from different walks of life, there are actually prototypes that are almost like ditto, like carbon copies of each other, right? So these are some things perhaps to explore and to pay attention to. All right, create a great day on purpose and keep your thinking caps on.